Hello everyone, and welcome to the 21st episode of the Die Society podcast. My name is Caio, and this is a show about Draw Steel, a tactical role-playing game made by MCDM. It's been quite a while since the last episode. Part of it is because the MCDM team, deservedly, chilled out a little after the release of the game a couple of months ago. But it was mostly because I have been making a lot of stuff for the Die Society. We'll talk about all of that and much more in the community section of the podcast. Then we'll tackle the news. We have more information about the upcoming Ancestries book, the Summoner beta, and a few updates to the Codex VTT. And last but not least, our main topic for the day. Since writing a full script for that section would take me time that I don't have right now, you'll get my unadulterated, unfiltered, unscripted opinions on Draw Steel versus Daggerheart. I'm not clickbaiting, by the way. If you want some TTRPG drama, there are better places on the internet for that. I just have some thoughts, that's all. Anyway, let's draw steel and get started. First, the community corner, beginning with something quite different than what I usually talk about here. Another RPG. Homios Udis is a weird fantasy rules light game written and illustrated by Mateus Greff, one of the amazing artists behind the monsters you see in Draw Steel. This is not an ad, I just love Mateus's art and my shelf still has plenty of room for indie creative games like the one he's made. Links to Homios Udis and everything else I'm going to feature in this segment can be found in this episode's description. Back to Draw Steel Land, a quick word about the stuff I have been up to. The first one is Jams of the Timescape, a collaboration between John Denor and I to get more people from the community making stuff for our favorite game. Unfortunately, it took me too long to make this podcast, and the submission window has already closed. But you can still take a look at all 39 treasure sets that the Jammers have made in just a couple of weeks. While you're there, join our Discord server to be notified when the second Jam of the Timescape begins. Yes, this is going to be a recurring thing. Besides jamming, I also published 2 new videos on the YouTube channel, How to Draw Steel Parts 1 and 2. In them, I talk about the basics of the game, how to roll for tests, and how combat abilities work. If you're looking for introductory material about the game, this is it. Finally, I have also written an adventure for the Blacksmith's Guild issue 3. While I don't want to spoil the story, I'm gonna give you just the title. The Elf King. This edition of the Draw Steel focused zine is supposed to come out on October 1st, so look forward to a few posts from me in the near future. And that's all for my stuff. I did make a bunch more things, but I can't talk publicly about those yet. So let's move on to what the rest of the community has been cooking. The first category of creation is cards. Min made a cool ability card PDF generator. Youngie, on the other hand, made a GitHub repo with all abilities already converted into printable ability cards. And Xochilex made retainer cards that mimic the style of the official Draw Steel character sheet. Now, let's cover layout tools. Both Mr. Matt Dollar and Solace have made fonts that can display Draw Steel icons. That's all the cool graphic design you see next to potencies, ability cards, tier results, etc. But if you want a full template for InDesign, Affinity, and Google Docs, Taylor made one. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Taylor made one. Taylor made for you. In the adventures department, we have 2. The first one by Heart of Arcana is The Cave of Ember Tears, coming to BackerKit in November. The second one is a MacGraw Hideaway, a conversion of 5e's Cragmaw Hideout by Gub. We also have updates to basically every online tool you can imagine. Stall by John Denor now has all the text of the core rules and can import your characters from Forged Steel. Speaking of which, Forged Steel by Andy Aiken now has automatic monster scaling. Again, speaking of which, the Steel Compendium by Zentis now includes all of the monster data. Finally, Owlbear Rodeo has a new extension called Ranges that can help you with bursts and auras during combat. Our final stop in the segment is player options. The Ascensions are an elemental ancestry successfully crowdfunded by 007 Goldfish. On the Edge by Legend Lore is a supplement that offers variant signature abilities to the game's kits. And last but not least, Alchemical Consumables by Mr. Matt Dollar includes over 30 new treasures for your table. Now it's time for the news. The two most important things here are very quick, so let's talk about them right now. First, Drawsteel now has an official errata document. It's mostly minor stuff, but it's worth it to browse the PDF just to see what's going to be updated in the next printing. Second, the printed books are about to start shipping, so make sure to update your address on the BackerKit survey to get the rules to your door in a timely manner. Okay, with those out of the way, let's talk about classes. First and foremost, the Summoner went through an open beta, so anyone, even non-patrons, could try it out for themselves. Sadly, I only had time to give the document a quick skim, so I don't have much else to say about this most recent version of the class. Besides the Summoner, we have learned that the Beastheart is still in development, the Acolyte, MCDM's sorta Warlock equivalent, is in concepting, and that the team is already getting ideas for how to get the Operator, MCDM's mecha class, up and running. No word on when these are coming out yet, but the Summoner will be released this year. What for sure isn't coming this year is the Ancestries book. Last episode, I talked a little bit about this, but now we know exactly what Ancestries will be featured in this product. Gnomes, rat people called Raiden Whites, goblins, shadow elves, fairies, dragonfly people called Scarge, non-Homo sapiens humans called Gol, and elemental people that live on the sun called Heliox. That's 8 new ancestries in case you weren't counting. Before we move on to the main segment, we gotta touch on MCDM's partnerships. Start Playing Games had an awesome Drawsteel launch event, and you can find loads of open tables on their website right now. Titancraft is currently running a Kickstarter campaign to fund a Drawsteel expansion for their software, including customizable hero minis, outfits, items, weapons, and monsters. This is the kind of stuff that would completely destroy my savings if I had a 3D printer. And finally, the Codex. The Codex. MCDM's proprietary VTT made by DM Hub just got a wiki, and the devs have been posting some pretty cool demos on their YouTube channel. The highlight for me was their new document system that lets you make tests, track montages, and control scene settings all in Markdown. This is the stuff, folks. Once the codec is out, I'm never going back. Okay, unscripted Kaio here to talk about our main topic of today. So this is a Drawsteel and Daggerheart. I on purpose didn't put a versus on the title like Drawsteel versus Daggerheart because I didn't want people to think this is clickbait. I honestly just want to compare the systems a little bit. So why am I talking about this right now? Why am I bringing Daggerheart up? So since the release of Drawsteel a couple of months ago, a lot of people online have been talking about Drawsteel, which is awesome. I even made like a list, and I'll leave links to all of these videos and podcasts in the description. Like Dungeon Master of None, Short Rest Studios, Total Party Thrill, Power Words Spell, Mastering Dungeons, Tales Abadia, D20 Play, Deficient Master. All of these have talked a bunch about Drawsteel, which is awesome. And many bring Daggerheart up when talking about Draw Steel. Deficient Master even made like a video. I think it's called Draw Steel versus Daggerheart versus My Brain or something, where he compares the two games like side by side during a combat. But what can I bring to the table to this discussion is that many people, I realize, have only played a one-shot of each system or maybe just read the rules. And I have been playing Draw Steel since, ever. But I also have been playing Daggerheart since June, like basically right after they released the game. So in the end, this is like my review of my review of Daggerheart for people who like Draw Steel. I know people who listen to this podcast like Draw Steel. So as a player in Daggerheart, I can give you my honest opinions of how the game feels and works, a comparison between the two, so you can know if Daggerheart is also for you, right? So just a few caveats before I start the main comparison segment. I didn't follow Daggerheart's development like I did Draw Steel. It would have been impossible. I haven't read the full Daggerheart book. I'm a player, so I've read most of the rules, like the relevant stuff for players, and my class, but I don't know all of what's in the book. Okay, so this is again just like a comparison between what the games feel like. And yes, this is a comparison from a player perspective, not a GM perspective. And I, of course, won't be listing every rules difference. Again, this is mostly about feel and scope, right? So I want to divide this comparison, this review, in two parts. A basic comparison of what the games claim they want to do, right? So they're kind of like mission statements. And then make a few rules comparisons given what we have learned about their mission statements, right? And because this is a Draw Steel podcast, I'll be comparing Daggerheart to Draw Steel all the time, so you have a frame of reference, right? I'm also going to be talking about D&D a lot, probably, because this is the lingua franca of the hobby. But yeah, I'm not gonna just talk about what Daggerheart feels like. It's gonna be what Daggerheart feels like compared to other games I know you have already played. So let's get to the basic comparison first. And the thing that's the core here is their keywords, right? So Draw Steel, we know, it's a tactical, heroic, cinematic fantasy game. These are the four pillars. On the other hand, Daggerheart has a sentence in the first page of their book. It's not like the four core pillars in the cover, but they do have a sentence that summarizes what the game is trying to do. And they say it's a heroic, narrative-focused experience that features combat as a prominent aspect of play. Right? So there's nothing here about fantasy, but I'm gonna add fantasy to Daggerheart's definition, right? Because you're fighting dragons and goblins and you can play as an elf. So I think I'm pretty safe saying that this is a fantasy game. Daggerheart is a little more broad. I feel like it's not as tied to the setting as Draw Steel. They even have some campaign frames that are not necessarily fantasy. So Daggerheart is a little more broad in the fantasy spectrum, but I would still say that both games attempt to do fantasy, right? So this is a point of similarity. The next point of similarity is heroic, right? Tactical heroic and heroic narrative focused. So I would say both games are trying to be heroic in the sense that you are a hero who's fighting bad guys to save the world, right? This is the core fantasy of the game. I would say Draw Steel leans in a bit harder into the heroic aspect, and it turns out more super heroic, not superhero with capes and stuff, but you start the game very, very, very powerful, and you're probably already like an experienced adventurer by the time you start level 1 of Draw Steel. Daggerheart is a little bit toned down, not as far as D&D's first level where you've basically just picked up a sword, but Daggerheart is a little bit more toned down, a little bit more down to earth. So Draw Steel is a little more superheroic, Daggerheart is a little less, but both are pretty heroic. Okay, so these are the 2 points of similarity: fantasy and heroic. These are 2 keywords I would say both games do really, really well, even if they have small differences. Where the major differences start to appear is in cinematic, right? So Draw Steel has the cinematic keyword, and Daggerheart says it's narrative focused. But if I recall correctly, like in the marketing materials, in the videos they have made talking about Daggerheart, they say cinematic explicitly. So I'm just gonna bundle narrative focused versus cinematic here, because I think this is apropos. Cinematic in Draw Steel has a very particular meanings, I would say. One of them is that you don't care necessarily about stuff that heroes in a movie would not care about. So you're not counting coins, you're not tracking encumbrance, right? It's not that kind of fantasy. It's not a dungeon crawler. And Daggerheart also has this feature, right? You're not tracking individual coins, you're not tracking encumbrance, you're not tracking if you have like pythons and I don't know how to pronounce this word. So pythons and crowbars and that kind of like dungeon crawling kit. So there's a partial similarity here, but this is where the similarities end for the cinematic keyword, because Draw Steel also talks about being a game where the abilities are very evocative, right? So the titles are very like you can imagine the character saying the title of the ability. There's flavor text that helps you imagine what is happening in the battlefield. I'm going to talk about combat in a second, right? So wait. While Daggerheart, with its narrative focus, has a little bit less of that, and it's a little bit more open-ended, right? So their cinematic means more fluid or loosey-goosey, but not in a pejorative sense. It just means you can flavor it however you want. It's not as opinionated as Draw Steel's cinematic feel, right? Lots of people say that when you play like a fighter and you just have an attack in D&D, you can flavor this attack however you want. And if you have very specific abilities with effects and flavor and names, it's really hard for you to imagine your character doing something different. And I think most people, when they hear cinematic, they think of Daggerheart style narrative focus and cinematics, right? That's why when I talk about Draw Steel with people, I usually, instead of cinematic, say evocative, right? So I think most people think cinematic doesn't jive really well with tactical combat, and it just depends on your definition, right? If you read the first page of the book, it talks about what cinematic means for them. So the cinematic aspect of both games, there's a point of contact, which is not tracking coins and encumbrance and that type of thing, but also a point of separation, where Draw Steel is more about like you can imagine like the Avengers movie with a bunch of CG and crazy scenes where you're going all over the place. This is the type of cinematic they're talking about. And Daggerheart is more fluid, conversational, and cinematic in the sense that you can flavor it however you want, that kind of stuff. This is at least what I've felt while playing both games. But the major difference is in the tactical aspect. So both games are centered on combat. So Daggerheart says combat as a prominent aspect of play in their sentence, and the first keyword of Draw Steel is tactical, right? So we're not leaving the realm of D&D here, right? Many people say D&D can be whatever you want, but two of the books are almost all basically about combat. The player's handbook is combat abilities and weapons and stuff you can use to kill monsters, and the monster manual is monsters to be fought. So both games are have a big focus on combat. But what type of combat is really different? So Draw Steel is a tactical game. So we all know that you have to use a grid, right? Every measurement is in squares on a grid, and positioning is really important, and you have to coordinate with the other players, right? You can imagine that as your heroes are adventuring together, they're spending their downtime like talking strategies and how to kill monsters, and in the fight, the tactician just looks at the shadow and they give the shadow a wink, and the shadow knows what to do. But at the table, this manifests as you looking at the shadow player and saying like, oh, I can help you with this, I can help you do this, I can give you a bonus to this, right? So it is a tactical game, okay? Which is, I think, how many people play D&D. Even though D&D doesn't necessarily support this type of tactics, especially in the teamwork dimension of tactics. But okay. Daggerheart is not tactical. At least that's. I think you could make it more tactical if you really pushed it, but it's not meant to be tactical. All the ranges are approximate, right? So close, far, very far. The abilities, they have some leeway for you to use them in and out of combat. The initiative system is super fluid. You can go twice in a row. You can go and then suggest that someone goes, or the GM can interrupt you by using fear. So you could move from like a role-playing scene into a combat scene very fluidly. You don't even have to roll for initiative, right? At the same time, Draw Steel's like, you have an action, a maneuver, a movement. You can do this, and this, and this with your action, with your maneuver, with your movement. And then you have a triggered action and free triggered actions. And so it's a lot of stuff to structure your combat, while Daggerheart takes a more loosey-goosey, more fluid approach. So I think both are in dialogue with their definitions of cinematic. So Draw Steel is thinking, well, we're going to need a big CG budget to make a movie of Draw Steel, right? Because these abilities are crazy and they have loads of like pushing and explosions and all that stuff. And Daggerheart, while it does have spells and of course and cool abilities at high levels, as far as I've read ahead in the book, it goes cinematic in the sense that it's fluid, that you don't have to worry about the exact number of squares, that you don't have to worry about exactly narrating the movement the ability you're using, right? And again, I think many people, when they hear cinematic, they think of this. They don't think of what Draw Steel is proposing. So again, this is why I say Draw Steel is more evocative in this sense. But yeah, the combat is very, very, very different. I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. Of course, I love Draw Steel combat, but Daggerheart is much more like chill. You don't have to remember as many things. I'm going to talk about this in a second, more about this in a second, but you don't have to to track as many things. You don't have to pay attention to the table at all times because you might miss a trigger for your special triggered ability, which is super cool. So you can relax more. You don't have to even go on a specific turn if you don't have anything cool to do. Of course, in my opinion, this comes with a few downsides, right? Because you're not as engaged with the combat. But if you're playing with the right people who are like interested in what's happening, and especially if you are able to give the combat a lot of narrative meaning, the combat can still be very interesting and not as mentally taxing as draw steel combat can sometimes be. So okay, now we've talked about the basic comparison between the mission statements of both games. So let's do a few rules comparisons so you know how it is to play Daggerheart, right? And the first comparison is the core role. Which is the power roll in Draw Steel versus the hope and fear roll in Daggerheart. So you know how the power roll works. You roll 2d10, add your bonuses, and check your tier, right? Tier 1, usually failure. Tier 2, mixed success. And Tier 3, usually success. So it's very powered by the apocalypse. Hope and fear in... it's called the duality dice. The duality dice in Daggerheart is more like a d20, right? So you're rolling 2d12s, adding them and adding your bonuses, but you're checking your result against a target number, like a DC. So this already means that in combat you can miss if you roll low, and you don't hit their AC. It's not called AC. I think it's called difficulty. You can miss and you can whiff your turn. But since it's very fluid, you can ask your friends to go again, right? If the GM decides not to interrupt you at that moment. Besides rolling 2d12 and adding your bonuses and checking against a target number, which the GM decides, you have 2 dice and you choose them before rolling. Right, so you usually have 2 colors of D12, and one of them is going to be your hope die, and the other one's going to be your fear die. If your hope die is higher than your fear die, or the same, you gain a hope, and which is a meta currency, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And you gain hope, and this is a positive consequence at the end of the action. Conversely, if your fear die is higher than your hope die, the GM gains a fear, and there's a negative consequence. So Daggerheart, you can have success plus and success minus. So you can succeed on the target. You can roll higher than the target number, but your fear die is higher. So it's a success with a consequence. For example, it's a mixed success. And you can also have the other 2 options. So a failure with a plus and a failure with a minus. So unlike Draw Steel, where you kind of have 3 outcomes, you have 4 outcomes here. And this really leans into the narrative focus of Daggerheart, because the GM has a lot of tools to use these success with a consequence, success with a benefit, and that kind of stuff to like spice up the narrative. So something might happen. A guard might see you. Stuff that can also happen in Draw Steel, but having hope and fear as like individual dice. Really elevates this aspect of the game. So what I don't want to, the second rule comparison I want to make is I don't want you to think that Daggerheart is a rules light game. It's a like narrative game for theater kids. When Bob World Builder did his review of Daggerheart, he even mentions this like specifically. This game is kind of crunchy. Daggerheart is kind of crunchy. I was counting how many resources you can use during combat, and I think it's the same number as resources you have in Draw Steel. So in Draw Steel, we have the big four, which is stamina, recoveries, your heroic resource, and surges. Right? So you can have victories as well, but these don't. These just affect the start of combat. Right. So it's mainly four. And Daggerheart also has four, as far as I could tell. Right? You have your HP, of course. You have stress, which is a separate damage track that you can use as a resource sometimes. Some abilities cause stress, and some monsters also cause stress. And stress can bleed into like HP, damaging your HP. So 2. And then you also have hope, which is kind of like your heroic resource. Some abilities cost hope. Some special stuff costs hope. You can use hope to re-roll. Okay. And the fourth one is armor, which in Daggerheart you have your AC equivalent, but you also have armor, which is like armor slots. If you spend an armor slot, you decrease the damage you take. Right? And this is an active choice. So you also have 4 meta currencies to track during combat. What is different here is that Daggerheart's meta currencies, they tick up and down much more slowly. First of all, you're usually gaining just 1 or spending 1 at a time. There's no situation where, like Draw Steel, at the start of your turn, you roll a d3 and you can gain between 1 and 3 heroic resources. And there's no besides the meta currencies going up and down a lot slower, there's not as much like triggering. Okay, so there's not like, again, in Draw Steel, when you have the opponent do something and you gain your heroic resource and your friend gives you a surge and you can spend a recovery to offset the damage you just took. These resources are going up and down a lot and really, really fast. And sometimes it's easy to forget that you gained something or that you used something, right? In Daggerheart, it's much easier to track those. Again, not necessarily good or bad. It's just different. So you might want to try Daggerheart to see what a crunchy game that doesn't demand as much feels like. Okay. I'm gonna come back to this crunchiness in a second, but first, let's talk a little bit about options in combat, which is the third rule comparison I want to make. Draw Steel gives you a lot since level 1. So so most characters, if I'm not mistaken, they get at least 4 actions, usually 4 actions, at least 1 maneuver, at least 1 triggered action. Right? I don't think I'm forgetting. You can get more of them, but the basics is 4 actions, usually 1 or 2 maneuvers, and usually 1 or 2 triggers. You also have some passives. Maneuvers like Judgment have loads of internal options of how to use them. So you have a lot of options during combat. And Daggerheart doesn't have as many. At least it doesn't feel like you have as many. If I recall, because now we're at level 2, at level 1, I think I had 5 cards. And by the way, the cards are really, 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 really good. They help you understand what you have really, really easily. And since you don't have a bonus action / maneuver equivalent, you just have cards and you're like, in my turn, which card do I use? Some cards have reactions, basically like when you take damage, you can spend a hope to reduce the damage. But the options are much more constrained, right? Even though the number might not be as different, you're not like, okay, so this action, it does this and this and this, and it gives me that and that and that. action, each card has a much like the feel it gives me is that they're more focused, right? They're more limited in applicability. So my ranger has a card that lets me focus on a target, right? It's like Hunter's Mark, and that's it. That's my card. In Draw Steel, that would be something like a Judgment, which not only gives me a bonus against the the monster, but that I'm marking, that I'm judging, but can teleport me closer to the monster, and I can use Wrath off turn to impose a bane or downgrade a potency. So right, even though you kind of have similar numbers of combat options, it's much easier to track and to understand what each one does. And this is like, it's concrete for me. This is made very clear because I was able to learn how to play first level character in Daggerheart really fast in like a one shot. And the next time we played with another character, I was like, okay, I know how this works, right? And Draw Steel's a little different. Their own Delian Tomb starter set has rules for like a kind of 0 level character that gains their abilities as time goes by, right? So yeah. So options in combat both have quite a few options, but not as many as like a D&D wizard, of course, but Daggerheart's options are a little like easier to keep on your head and on your hand because you have the cards. And the last thing I want to talk about in the rules comparison, with the crunchiness in mind and the combat options in mind, is monster complexity, which I think is going to lead us into the only thing I don't like about Daggerheart, like actually don't like. But monster complexity in Daggerheart is much lower than in Draw Steel. I haven't GM'd Daggerheart, but I have taken a look at the creatures in the SRD, and they're way simpler. Most like tier 1 creatures have just a couple of things they can do. They have a few hit points. They have a difficulty, which is their AC, the equivalent of their AC, the equivalent of their spell save, with the equivalent of everything you would need a static number for. They have just a plus for attack, and that's all. And since again you don't have a maneuver equivalent, you're dealing with basically actions and sometimes reactions. So they are super, super simple. I would say they kind of sometimes look like, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but they lean more towards a Shadow Dark creature, right? Where it's just a little bit of text and maybe 1 or 2 abilities they can use in combat. So super, super simple. I haven't GM'd, but it feels like for the GM, it would be much, much easier to run a combat in Daggerheart if that's what you're looking for, right? Because what the consequence is that sometimes creatures feel a little bit more like bags of hit points, which is a problem 5th edition had a little early on in its life cycle. It's like, okay, you have a few hit points and you can do one thing, right? Which is not satisfying to people who like tactical combat sometimes. Again, could you maybe use a bunch of different creatures? Could you like really lean into their different abilities and their descriptions and what they can do? Probably. But from playing it for one level and a half, and from looking at the rules, it doesn't look like this is the sort of intended play style of these monsters. Which leads me to one very specific thing that I don't like about Daggerheart, and this might resonate with you. So this is why I'm mentioning it. Is talking of monsters and like complexity. You have in Daggerheart HP like damage thresholds, 2 actually. So when you roll for damage, you're like rolling a d10, right, and adding a bonus, and that's it. But when the damage gets to the target, either monster or you, right? You also have this. You check the damage against a threshold. If the damage is lower than your first threshold, you take 1 point of HP. You lose 1 HP. So your HP is very low in Daggerheart because you even if the person rolls like a 3, that would get reduced to a 1 because it doesn't cross your first threshold. If it's above your first threshold but below your second threshold, you take 2 damage. And if it's above your second threshold, you take 3 damage, right? So as far as I can tell, I haven't read the full book, but as far as I can tell, this is the most damage you can deal and that you can take. So what sometimes happens is, for example, our GM, he wanted to give us a big creature to fight. Like, oh, this is almost an impossible situation. You have to run. You have to leave. This is a tier. I think it was a tier 3 creature, which is like level 7, if I recall correctly. And we are level 2. So we were screwed. We thought we were screwed. But once push comes to shove, right? The creature deals like 40 damage, rolls like a bunch, and we realize, oh, we can only take 3 damage. It's a different name. You only cross off 3 HP. You're not using the same term damage for both sides. So the creature deals damage and you take HP. You cross off HP, and we realize like, okay, if we have 6 HP. And we can even use armor slots to decrease the damage severity, right? We can basically run and take 2 or 3 hits, even though the creature is rolling like 40 damage, and it doesn't really matter because we can run away because we're gonna take 2 or 3 damage at most, and that's what I felt wasn't that good for me specifically. This might be a godsend for you because you don't want to like, how much is 72 minus 13? I don't want to do this math. Just tell me 1, 2, or 3 damage. But what doesn't feel nice to me is that sometimes a player is like, oh, I'm gonna use all of my hope and use this combo. I'm gonna crit, and I rolled 20 damage, and like, it's 3 HP. It didn't matter. It didn't really matter. You could have rolled that with a high damage roll and not care, right? And I understand that their game is narrative focused and tries to be that kind of cinematic, and it's not about tactical combat. But if combat is central to the game, it features as a prominent aspect of play, as they said, I feel like this HP system doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth. I don't know. I really want to know what y'all think. Like, is it really good because it's really simple and it's really easy to track and you don't have to think of how much damage you're subtracting here and there? Or does it leave you also wanting for, well, if I'm rolling a d10, I want to do 10 damage at most, right? Why would I roll a d10 if I can only do 3 actual damage? And this is what feels a little bad for me, because of course I'm more into the tactical aspect of combat, and Daggerheart works really well for me. I really like the system. I really love that I don't have to pay as much attention as as in Draw Steel, because when I'm playing Draw Steel, I want all that combat in my head. But sometimes you just want to relax, you just want to talk to your friends, you want something a little chill. And Daggerheart works really well for that. I love the Hope and Fear. I think it's a really, really good narrative mechanic. But yeah, the combat, I think it shows one or two cracks when you go, So do monsters have to be balanced? Does that matter? Because if I put a tier 4 monster in front of my players, they can survive like three turns maybe. If they use their armor right. Again, I might be missing a rule, but I don't think I am. And yeah, if you agree, let me know. If you disagree, let me know. If I'm understanding the rules wrong, me and my GM, please let us know. I think all of my other comments are still valid. Because Daggerheart is a really good game that does what it says on the tin, just like Draw Steel. It's just a different tin, right? It says a different thing on the tin. But yeah, I hope you liked this unscripted segment. It was really long. I'm just looking at the recording. It's really long. So I hope the audio is good. I hope because I'm not gonna go through all of this and edit every silence out. So yeah, I hope you liked this chill conversation, and let me know your opinions in the comments. So I'm gonna leave you with the outro, and have a good time. And that's it for today, folks. I hope you guys enjoy the episode. A special thanks to my current Initiate and Adept level patrons: Seth Lang, Thomas Rodriguez, TDS, Brendan West, and Anton Carmola. Thank you all so much. Make sure to check out this episode's description for links to all of my socials, the Dice Society's mailing list, and my Discord server. I'll also leave some links there to James's, Matt's, and MCDM's accounts so you can follow them too. See you all next time. Thank you very much, and goodbye.